So you suck at starting IVs. Don't despair. It's completely fixable. I was horrific at starting IVs when I was a new medic, and with some coaching and the identification of a couple of easy to fix things that I was doing wrong, I got much better. First things first, good vein selection is key. You want to find a nice, straight, plump vein. You want to go by feel and not so much color under the skin because that can be very deceiving. What may look like a nice bluish vein under the skin could be a tiny little squiggle vessel that is going to blow as soon as you puncture it. If you can't go by feel and you have to go by anatomy and the bluish color under the skin, that happens. But that's not the norm, and it shouldn't be your first line approach to finding a vein. I recommend looking at the whole arm from the bicep to the fingers. Don't be afraid to flip the arm over if you don't like what you're seeing. All the time, I see students searching the crook of the arm, looking for an AC. Meanwhile, the patient's got a nice juicy vein popping out of the back of their hand or their forearm. Or vice versa, the student's finger fucking the patient's hand looking for a vein that doesn't exist. And there's a vein the size of a slug in the AC. You want the vein to be plump without a valve and straight. If there is a valve, stick the catheter a millimeter or two above it. As far as the preferred spot and size, 20 gauge is a good go-to, 18's fine too, and 18 works just fine in crash resuscitations, but frankly, a patent IV is what you're looking for. Nurses hate IVs in the AC because anytime the patient bends their arm, the IV pump is going to sense an obstruction and it's going to alarm. It is indeed a real pain in the ass when that happens. The flip side is that ACs tend to have nice big veins that are easy to get in a pinch, no pun intended. IVs in the wrist are painful for the patient. IVs on the inside of the wrist really hurt. I like to find a nice straight forearm vein. I have a lot of success with that, but at the end of the day, fuck it. We are striving for patency. I'd rather have a patient with a 22 in the back of the wrist than a patient with a bunch of holes in their arm and no access because they want us to have an 18. I have run codes in a patient that had a 22 gauge. I have pushed D50 through a 24 in the finger. Again, that's not optimal, but patent access wins every time. The next thing I see students mess up is going in with too steep of an angle. That's a recipe for poking right through the vein. Go more shallow than you might think. 9 out of 10 times when I'm helping a student snag a vein, I'm saying you're too deep, you're underneath the vein, than I am saying you're too shallow, go deeper. This is especially true on little kids and the elderly. Go super shallow with your angle. Them suckers is right under the skin and you can very easily blow through the vein. The next, and this is probably the biggest thing in my opinion, and this is what I was fucking up on all of my IVs. Remember from anatomy class, there are 3 layers in a vessel wall: the tunica intima, the tunica media, and the tunica adventitia. Once you puncture the vein, you're going to get a flash. Duh. However, you might not be through all of the layers of the vein's wall. People get a flash and they think, I'm good. I'm in. And then they advance the catheter and you see the catheter stop advancing. And the student is then looking at the catheter perplexed because they have a flash in the chamber, but the catheter is not advancing. They're thinking, WTF, I'm in the vein, I got a flash, why isn't this advancing? So they then put some pressure on the catheter and they advance it. And you see the IV site blow up, infiltrate, and bruise. And then the patient's Karen daughter is going to complain because she sees her 212-year-old mother's arm with a lumpy bruise, and she's going to be all like, look what they did to my mother's arm. When you do this, you have blown the vein. You got your flash, but the tip wasn't all the way in. Story of some of our lives. Tip of the IV catheter wasn't all the way through the 3 layers. You got resistance with it trying to advance a catheter because it was bumping up against one of the inner layers of the vessel wall. And when you forced the catheter to advance, you ripped through the other layers, creating a tear in the vessel, blowing it. Once you get your flash, stop. Take a second and collect your thoughts. Then, and this is critically important, reduce the angle of the entire IV catheter. I make it almost flush with the skin. Then stop for another second and collect your thoughts. We're still not advancing the plastic catheter yet. Once you have reduced your angle, take the entire IV poker and advance it just a little millimeter further. I know it sounds counterintuitive. You're worried about blowing through the vein by going deeper. You're not. You're doing the opposite. By advancing the entire needle a little bit more, you're making sure you are through those other layers of the vessel wall and into the lumen of the vessel, which is where you want to be. Since you reduce the angle of the unit before advancing it, you're preventing it from going through the other side of the vessel. Then you can advance your catheter. There won't be resistance and blood will be flowing. You'll make a mess and your preceptor will yell at you, but at least he, she, or they, them are not yelling at you for blowing the vein.